listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. Welcome to my show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. And also, you can come over, maybe even while you're listening to Odyssey Radio, come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast. And you can see that at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. But one of the best things about the video simulcast over on YouTube is the chat room. It's a live chat room going on right now during this show. So come on over, add your 2 cents worth to the program, or just join in the conversation that's out there. And tonight we're going to continue on our ancient, how would I say this? It's the, I'm kind of in this pagan Yahwehistic mode of ancient Israel, where they're looking at certain things about the faith of Israel. Why is that important to us when we're Americans or New Zealanders or Australians or Germans or British or whatever you are listening tonight? I think for me, it's an important history because it links us back into some of the Judeo-Christian roots. I was going to say our roots, but I know some of us aren't even Judeo-Christian, even from the beginning of our lives. But a lot of us are. And this takes us back to our roots, and it examines some of the things that we were either told to believe or that we thought we believed. When I talk about paganism and ancient Israel, that's a little refreshing to me, only because we were brought up believing that everything was monotheistic and it was one God and one everything, until you start digging a little deeper and you find texts and you find things that seem to contradict that a little bit. And so you want to dig deeper. So last night we looked at the pagan Yahwehism of ancient Israel. And tonight, I'm not going to go so much there as a little sidebar I kind of found. It's this idea that we had of God sleeping. Now, I remember in my biblical studies, maybe you'll remember some of these. Some of this is Sunday school story stuff, and we ended up studying it, of course, in more detail when I was in seminary. But if you remember Elijah the prophet, and he was constantly at odds with Ahab and Jezebel, the queen of the king of Israel. And he was always at odds with the prophets of Baal, or Baal. And there was a confrontation they had. And it was up on the top of Mount Carmel. Now, if you take a look at a map of Israel, just call one up, map of current-day Israel, you'll see on the Mediterranean out on the west coast of Israel, you're going to see the coastline will move up, and then there's this little notch, and it goes in, and then it continues to go up north. And that little notch, sitting on that notch, is Mount Carmel. And that mountain is where, in ancient times, according to the biblical story, there was a confrontation between the prophet of God, Elijah, and the prophets of Baal. And I think the account says there were about 400 of them. And I didn't review this account because it just came into my head as we're talking about God sleeping. But Elijah kind of gives them the chance. He says, whoever's God can come down and burn the offering out of a fire out of heaven, burn the offering on the altar that we've just built out of stones. He says, his will be the God in Israel. And so he challenges them. And there's 400 of them. They're spinning in circles and they're doing their thing, their ecstatic religion. And they're all trying to call down the fire from the prophet of God. The prophet Baal. Not the prophet, the god Baal. And, of course, in the biblical account, Baal's not there. Baal's not able to do anything. They get no answer to their prayer. And Elijah is mocking them. And he says, perhaps your God is in the privy. Maybe he went to have a pee. And he's gone. Maybe he's sleeping. And this is why this came to me, is this notion of God sleeping. And even in the Judeo-Christian Bible, there are incidents of God sleeping. And so I want to look at this and find out, what does this mean? Because sometimes, even in our faith, if you still have a Christian faith or a Judaic faith, we have those moments where we think, God's asleep. God's not really listening. He doesn't hear anything I have to say. And but I wanted to look at this because I think it's an interesting aspect of God that we don't normally come across. And the God of the Bible both rests and he sleeps, according to the Scripture. In this, he resembles other ancient Near Eastern deities. The Hebrew theologians shared a mythic vocabulary with their neighboring cultures. When we talked about Yahweh and we talked about the consort of Yahweh, Ashtaroth or Astarte, Asherah, these are all things that were shared by the neighboring cultures. But the Hebrew theologians used this vocabulary to elevate their theology to a spiritual height previously unknown in that region. And perhaps the most famous biblical instance of God resting occurs at the conclusion of creation. Remember the creation story. The passage from Genesis is still recited in Jewish homes on Sabbath Eve as part of the Kaddish, and the prayer that sanctifies the Sabbath meal goes along with that. We recite these stories also in Christianity. The Kaddish prayer, the Sabbath meal, says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done." So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all his work which he had done in creation. Now that's Genesis 2, 1 through 3. And you might think, and you might ask yourself, why would an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful, eternal God, as he's been described to us, need to take a break? Why would he need to rest? Now, does that mean he's sleeping, he's physically worn out, and he needs to recharge? Or does that mean that he's just resting, he's stopping the work, and he's taking a break from it? So the Hebrew word translated as rest is suambat, whose primary meaning is to cease or to stop. And its strictly literal translation might read as, do the New Testament and the New English Bible, that the New English Bible and the New Jewish Publication Society translation of it, God ceased from all his work. Nevertheless, the connotation of rest cannot be eliminated from siompat, as the larger biblical tradition shows. And the fifth commandment in Exodus 20:11 prescribes observance of the Sabbath because, according to the commandment, in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But on the seventh day he rested, Yanah. And therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath and hallowed it. Now this linking of Sabbath rest with the creation story clearly reveals that the Israelites themselves understood God to have rested upon the completion of his work. So you can see Exodus and Exodus 23, Deuteronomy 5, these things are repeated over again. And the divine rest following creation is also a common motif in ancient Near Eastern mythologies. The divine rest that follows creation, as it were, a statement that the creative activity is complete and that the work of the Creator is perfect. And now he shall cease from that and take a break from that or take a rest from that. So, and by the way, on the Sabbath, in the Jewish, you look at Jewish customs today, traditions, the practice of the Sabbath, it starts at, I think it's sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. And that's the Sabbath. And on the Sabbath, you aren't to do anything. You aren't to walk down to the grocery store. You aren't to take the dog for a walk. You aren't to bake or cook. You're not to do anything. And so the Sabbath is taken very seriously, especially amongst very Orthodox Jews. And this is what it meant. It was resting. It was not doing any work. That was man's interpretation of that. So divine rest following creation is this common motif that you see that says the work of the Creator is done. It's perfect. Does it mean he's worn out and needs to sleep or he needs to rest? Don't know yet. We'll get there. But it does mean he's just stopping from what he's done. In the Egyptian text known as the Theology of Memphis, the Memphite god Ptah is portrayed as the real creator, prior in time and principal to all the other gods. After describing how Ptah brought forth the other gods and the world and everything that exists, the text states, and so Ptah rested, after he had made everything as well as all the divine order. So now this is Wilson's alternative translation. Fearing that they were being too much influenced by the parallel in Genesis 2, 1 through 3, some scholars have preferred to translate them more neutrally, so Ptah was satisfied. That's the alternative. And you can look this all up in their works. You don't have it in front of you, so if you want it, you can write me and I can let you know where to find this stuff. So there's all this information that you can look into. So in the ancient Near East, creation was thought of as bringing order out of chaos, so as to make existence possible and life meaningful within this whole circumscribed boundary of this ordered universe or cosmos that had been created. And because human habitat, the solid land beneath our feet, is surrounded by its opposite, the formless ocean, the cosmos was frequently depicted as an island surrounded on all sides by the primeval sea. The tension between chaos and cosmos was so felt so intensely that the primeval sea was often personified as a sea monster, Tiamat in the Mesopotamian. We talked about Tiamat in the past. In the Mesopotamian mythology, Yam in the Canaanite, and Nun in the Egyptian tradition, or some kind of watery dragon, Lotan, the biblical Leviathan, in Canaan, or Apophis in Egypt. And so the creator deity first had to defeat this monster, whatever form he took in these varying cultures, before the cosmos could come about. And so in the Babylonian story of the Enuma Elish, this is with Gilgamesh, we covered that just a couple of weeks ago, the text explicitly concludes with the Creator resting after his victory over chaos. So even in the Genesis account, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters and said, "Let there be light." And there was light. So even the Genesis creation story, familiar in Judeo-Christianity, is a story where the earth and the universe and all that is was formed out of nothingness, out of chaos. And so in the creation story in Genesis 1 through 2:3, there's this deliberate muting of conflict between the chaos and the chaos monster. Anyone who reads Genesis 1 through 2:3 alongside the Enuma Elish and other ancient Near Eastern mythological texts is going to be struck by how careful, circumscribed language of the Genesis author is used in that passage. He purposely avoids every hint of polytheism. Whoever wrote that, I believe it was Moses, and I don't believe there's any reason to doubt that historically, but he avoids every hint of polytheism. He refers to the sun and the moon only in the most oblique manner as the two great lights, Genesis 1:16 through 18, instead of giving them human or animal or monsterish characteristics. he refers to them as the two lights in the sky, lest even the mention of their names might cause an association with the false gods that were commonly personified by the sun and the moon. So the author of Genesis knew very well that the sun and the moon were widely regarded, even by many in Israel, as gods, or at least as the visible manifestations of gods by those names, the sun and the moon. And in 2 Kings 23:5 in the Old Testament, we read of idolatrous priests who made offerings to the sun and the moon. And you can look at Deuteronomy 4 and Ezekiel 8, cross-reference those. And so the Genesis author calls them not sun and moon, but great light and lesser light. You can find that in Genesis 1:16. He doesn't even use the names of the planetary spheres or the star of the sun. He doesn't call them sun and moon. And that could be because there was what they considered worship of those things. And so the Genesis account contains only really the slightest vestiges of the mythological sea monster. In Genesis 1:1, chaos is referred to as the deep. And in Hebrew, Teoeam, if I'm pronouncing that right, cognate to Tiamat. But chaos is portrayed as a foe, but as the raw material that the creator organized to provide this ordered cosmos at the time of creation. And so despite his muting of the chaos battle itself, the attribution of rest to God in Genesis 2:1-3 is a remnant of that traditional story of the God, the creator, the one who made all that is, the originator. As we heard when we were talking about the jinn, we talked about the originator. But it's how the originator and the creator was the one who fought with chaos or fought with the great monsters that we ascribe to them and brought creation out of it. And then after that, he rested. And so it's a remnant of the story in Genesis. And its survival here likely stems from the fact that Genesis, the creator's rest, was understood less of as a sleep of the victor over these chaotic beasts, these mythological creatures, less of that than as the leisure appropriate to the divine craftsman, satisfied with the perfection of his work. And so although the Genesis author studiously avoided transcribing creation as this battle between the creator and the chaos monster, other biblical writers were not so circumspect. Remember when we say that, the Bible is a collection of 66 different books. If I'm correct on that, 66 I believe it is. And in those you've got different authors and their different points of view. And so this battle between creator and chaos monster is sometimes not so veiled, tucked away amidst these various psalms, as well as in the book of Job, which is the earliest chronologically written book of the Bible, the book of Job. And elsewhere are these references to Yahweh's battle with the chaos monster, depicted either as the primeval sea or the sea dragon. Listen to this. This is out of the book of Psalms. Now, this is Psalm 74, and it's verses 13-17. It says, "It was you, God, who shattered the sea by your might, who smashed the heads of the dragon on the water." The dragon. "It was you who crushed the heads of Leviathan, who gave him to the sharks as food. It was you who opened springs and brooks. It was you who turned primordial rivers into dry land. To you belongs the day and the night as well. It was you who established the moon and the sun. It was you who fixed the boundaries of the earth. Summer and winter, you created them." And so here we have this story of God shattering the sea with his might. He crushed the heads of Leviathan and gave them to the sharks, fed them to the sharks. Here's this this picture of this chaos monster being fought by the creator, the originator. And you can find this, by the way, there's a book by called God's Conflict with the Dragon. And you can read all about that in that book. Now, again, you have this same lot less circumspect approach to the chaotic dragon, the chaotic monster that the Creator had to overcome. It says in Psalm 89, 9 through 11, "You rule the arrogant sea. When its swells surge, you still them. You crushed Rahab with a mortal blow. With your mighty arm you scattered your armies. The heavens are yours, yours also is the earth. The world and all that is in it, you founded them." Now, in the book of Job, once again, the earliest chronological book in the Bible, this is pre-Judaic religion, is as far back as this is written. You might be looking at the book of Job as being in the time of, like, Göbekli Tepe, places like these 12,000-year-old places. Now, Job describes the defeat of the monsters that resulted in creation. He says this is in Job chapter 26, verses 5 through 13. Job says this, "The shades beneath writhe, the waters and their inhabitants. Naked is Sheol before him. Perdition has no cover. He stretches Zaphon over the void, suspends the earth on nothing. He binds the waters in nimbus, but the clouds burst not with the burden. He obscures the face of the full moon, spreading his cloud over it. He marks a circle on the face of the water, as the boundary of light and dark. And the pillars of heaven tremble. Stunned at his rebuke, by his power he quelled the sea, by his cunning he smote Rahab, by his wind he bagged the sea, his hand pierced the fleeting serpent." Now, this is all really cool stuff when you think about it, because this is not just your biblical tale. This is a biblical tale of monsters defeated by the great creator, the originator, which mirrors all the other cultures around Israelite culture and around Yahwehite culture, the worship of Yahweh. And so in none of these descriptions do we find God retiring or resting after his battle with the chaos monster. But in the other descriptions, the image is often implied. One of the most powerful passages, sometimes referred to as the Ode in Yahweh's Arm, comes from Isaiah 51, 9 through 11. If God is called to awake, as he is in this passage, he has to have been resting or sleeping. And this passage says, Isaiah 51, "Awake, awake, robe yourself in power, O arm of Yahweh." Awake as in primordial days, those primeval generations. It's not you who cleaves Rahab in pieces, or is it not you who cleaves Rahab in pieces, who pierces the sea dragon? Is it not you who dries up the sea, the waters of the great abyss, Teuhu Ahem, the one who makes the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to pass over? And we got to leave off there because we're out of time for
awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through the break. Welcome back to segment two of the, what the heck is the name of my show? The Intrepid Radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. Go over to Odyssey Radio, ODYSY1.com to hear the audio version of this show and see all the places where you can hear the audio version of this show. You can also find the archives and links over to the Spreaker site, the iTunes site, the iHeartRadio site. But you can also come over to my YouTube channel and watch the video simulcast over on youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts and join all the other Intrepids over in the live chat room. Chat room going on right now. Everybody talking about this show, talking about every other thing as well. They talk about their cars. They talk about what they're making for dinner. They talk about all different kinds of things. So come on over, join the club over there, and enjoy yourself in the chat room. You can also go over to my website. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. If you were watching the video, you saw the ad just a minute ago. If you were not, go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. You can see what I do. I'm an illustrator, a graphic designer. I do book illustrations, children's books illustrations, book covers, book interior designs, corporate identity, logo pieces, and so on. So go on over, take a look at my work. My phone number is there. My contact numbers are there. If you need any of that kind of work done, get a hold of me. I'm always here. It seems 24/7. Well, because it is 24/7. So call me anytime. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for listening. All those of you over in the chat room, thanks for being here. Let's pick up where we left off. We're talking about Jehovah or Yahweh resting, God sleeping, and how the Bible talks about his sleep. And we used to think that, well, it's not so much that God had to sleep because of the way we were taught in Judeo-Christianity. It's not that God had to sleep because he was tired. He's all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient. Omnipotent is all-powerful. Omnipresent, all these miraculous, holy, everlasting, eternal things of God. And that when he took the rest, the Sabbath day, in the fifth commandment, the reason for the Sabbath was so that man could do what God did, and that was rest from his work. But we always understood that to be something that God was not resting because he was worn out. He was resting because he was ceasing from his work, taking a day off, even if he didn't need the rest. But what we're finding is that even the man who wrote the book of Genesis and told us about creation, which is where the fifth commandment relates to the resting of God after creation as what we should be doing on the Sabbath. And so he relates it back to creation. But the guy who wrote the commandments, the guy who wrote the book of Genesis, pretty much whitewashed any reference to any other culture having a similar kind, or that Judaism having a similar kind of creation story as any other culture. But you put them side by side and you'll see. You take the Enuma Elish, as we mentioned, Gilgamesh's book, and you take and you look at all the other cultures and the different religions of the day around Israel, and you're going to see cultures that had these stories of these fabulous monsters that the creator, the originator, had to defeat and then take a rest from that. And Yet, while Moses didn't mention this in the book of Genesis, you can find in other passages in the book of Psalms, in the book of Isaiah, you find these mentions of all these different beasts and God actually resting from them. So, why is it that the book of Genesis doesn't tell us or make these comparisons, but the other books do? I think it's because you had different authors writing different aspects of things. You had Moses, who probably had a purpose in the way he wrote something, and he left those stories out, those comparatives out. Like we say, he didn't even name the sun and the moon, the sun and the moon. Why? Because he grew up in Egyptian culture. In Egyptian culture, you talk about the sun and the moon, you're naming gods. And so he left those names off and called them the greater light and the lesser light. And so we've gone through a couple of these examples at the end of the first segment. The last one we talked about was Isaiah 51, where it says, speaking to God, "Awake, awake, robe yourself in power, O arm of Yahweh." Awake as in primordial days, ancient days, those primeval ancient generations. Is it not you who cleaves Rahab in pieces, who pierces the sea dragon? Is it not you who dries up the sea, the waters of the great abyss? The Teuo Amen, I can't even pronounce it because of the way it's structured in Hebrew. The one who makes the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to pass over. So both the image of the battle against the chaos monster and the image of the divine victor retiring to sleep lie beneath the prophet's appeal for help. So once again, however, this Israelite adaptation of the motif of the sleeping deity has been shaped by her unique theology. This ode is the work of so-called Deutero-Isaiah, or Second Isaiah, Isaiah that's 40 through 55 in the chapters, who wrote in the 6th century BC. After the destruction of both the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, at a time when Israel was in exile in Babylon. The ode is part of the putative dialogue between the exiles and God. And it's this community laments that God has no thought for his people's plight in exile. He talks about, "And we shall hang our harps in the trees, and we'll cry and we'll lament. We have nothing to sing about." And so the ode is part of this putative dialogue. And it's followed by a series of divine assurances from God, written by the prophet in Isaiah 51. You'll find all these different verses in Isaiah 52. That God has not forgotten his people, but is even now in the process of returning them from Babylon to their homeland. And so in their lament, the exile community calls upon God to wake up and come to their rescue. Wake up! They're calling to what they call the sleeping God. They appeal to the tradition of his past saving acts, his salvific acts, as the reason why he should act in the present crisis. You can see a much more watered down, less religious version of this by looking at the current elections in the United States, where those who voted for Joe Biden are saying he is now the guy in power, and it's going to be time for us to wake up and to come to our senses, and a time when peace shall now reign, and a time when everybody's going to be unified, and if you're not unified, we'll hate you. You know, that kind of thing. But we're seeing an example of that in our own culture now without the religious trappings. And so the Jews called upon God, the Israelites, to wake up and come to their rescue. They appeal to the tradition of his past salvific acts as the reason why he should act in the present crisis, their captivity. And so God's salvific power was most manifest in his victory over the chaos monster at the creation of the world, and in his splitting of the Red Sea in order to allow his people to escape from Egypt under Moses during the Exodus. Now, this is not a case of myth in one instance and history in the other. Rather, as was the case with other biblical authors, Deutero-Isaiah understood these two incidents, creation and the splitting of the Red Sea, as essentially one and the same act of salvation. This was God showing his power and creating. I don't know what was salvific about creation other than saving chaos from the chaos monster, saving life and light and creation from the chaos monster. And then, of course, the Red Sea, saving God's people from the closing of the Red Sea and also the closing of the Red Sea to kill the Egyptian army pursuing them. So this Egypt was viewed as this historical manifestation of the power of God. And it was a powerful manifestation of the chaos that preceded creation. So compare, if you're taking notes on this stuff, or if you want to go back and take notes, look at Ezekiel in the Old Testament, the book of Ezekiel 29, verse 3, Isaiah 27:1 and 30, verse 7. Look at those. The exodus from Egypt was regarded as an extension of God's creative power. Just as God split the primeval sea to create dry land, so he split the sea again during the Exodus to create a special people for himself. Now remember, Judaism didn't exist at the time of the Exodus. This was pre-Judaic religion. Moses was the guy who codified Judaism out in the wilderness after the Exodus. Now, they had a form of pre-Judaic religion, you could say a prototype religion, but Moses was the dude that wrote it all down. He says, now, this is what you're going to do. Moses created Judaism out of whole cloth, and he referred to some of their oral stories and traditions. And you can see a really detailed discussion on the topic. There's a couple of articles that you could look at over at Biblical Archaeology Review. One of them is called Red Sea or Reed Sea, which is a great topic, by the way. And the Reed Sea, requisite et pace. I didn't even use the word requisite, so I couldn't even define it for you. This is the Journal of Biblical Literature. So you can find places where you can study this if you really want to get that deep into it. So the Exodus from Egypt was regarded as this extension of God's creative power. And Deutero-Isaiah, the dependence of that book on the old Semitic Chaoskampf, that's German, Chaoskampf. What do you suppose that means? You think of Scheisskopf, that's a shithead. This is Chaoskampf. It's the head of chaos. It's a myth that is very patent. And to these Judahites sitting in exile in Babylonia, their temple having been razed and Jerusalem reduced to ashes, must have seemed that their world was rapidly reverting to chaos. And creation, according to them and their religious sensibilities, was being absolutely undone. So practically, every translation of this soul ode from Deutero-Isaiah renders the action in the past tense. Was it not you who didst cut Rahab into pieces, didst dry up the sea, which is all past tense? However, the Hebrew poet used participles, not the grammatical perfect, thus revealing his belief that God's saving actions continue into the present. This is why, by the way, we took languages in seminary. This is why we took Hebrew. This is why we took Koine Greek. This is why some guys went on and they took Aramaic for the few Aramaic passages in the Bible. It's to understand what the hell something means in its original language. And so, while it says in the English, it interprets it as in past tense, was it not you who didst cut Rahab, or didst dry up the sea? It's not the grammatical perfect. It reveals his belief that God's saving actions continue into the present. So it's like we had this present aorist tense in Greek, which would say the tense is, it sounds like it's in the past, but God will have provided a way for us in the future. Something to that effect. And it was the present aorist future and the present aorist present aorist past. All these tenses mean something when you're studying the language. And that is how you understand context of what the hell is being said in these old scriptures. And the appeal to Yahweh in that passage to wake up is therefore also a statement that Yahweh's supreme authority is at stake. How can Yahweh sleep when his arch foe is even now challenging his domain? Now, of course, this might be from the perspective of the faithful believers that saw Jerusalem sacked and burned and the temple razed to the ground, and they're all drug off to Babylonia as captive culture. And here they are, they're captives, they're away from their homeland. It's kind of like the Irish, you know. It's like the Irish boomerang. You throw it out, and it doesn't come, and it sings sad songs about coming back to you again. This is what Israel did during this period. They sung laments about being away from their homeland, and they saw this as God sleeping. And so the appeal to him in that passage in Isaiah to wake up the arm of Yahweh. They were saying that Yahweh's supreme authority was at stake because his archfoe is even now challenging his domain by carrying his people into exile. So Yahweh's response in this, incidentally, as artfully reverses the tables. As the ode continues, it's not Yahweh, but Israel who is asleep and who needs to wake up. The exiles must awake and rise from their own stupor. To be sure, they have drunk heavily from the cup of Yahweh's wrath. But that cup, drained to the dregs, is now finished, says Isaiah 51. The reversal is explicit in Isaiah 52, which echoes but reverses the final line of the ode quoted above. It's Zion, Zion who must wake up, not Yahweh. Awake, awake, robe yourself in power, O Zion. Array yourself in beautiful garments. Shake yourself from the dust. Arise, O captive Jerusalem. Loose the bonds from your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. That's Isaiah 52. And you could again almost see a parallel for those of you who think these things through critically in the political sphere. All those who are saying, we're saved from the evils of the Trump administration, and the Biden administration will now be our joy and our peace, and we'll be able to all come together in unity at the same table again. Yet at the same time, they're condemning anybody who adheres to anything like what the Trump agenda was. So they already have a hypocrisy that's built in, but at the same time, it's really the message is still going out. It's been reversed and turned back on them. No, you are the ones who need to wake up. And so this is what you see. And again, it's just an example in current politics, current events, to show you how this works. At the base of this dramatic dialogue lay Judah's conviction that Yahweh's creative power continued unabated into the present, and that his absolute dominion has never been in doubt. In the background of this Isaianic call for God to wake up is another aspect of the resting or the sleeping deity in Near Eastern mythology, an aspect related to yet distinct from the rest of the deity took following creation. So Near Eastern gods are entitled to leisure, to rest, to sleep as prerequisites of their godly status. I'm a god! I can sit by the pool today. Fuck off. It's almost the impression you get if you were to put it down into the vernacular, the crass vernacular. So before the creation of human beings, a Babylonian myth tells us the lesser gods had to work for the higher gods. Humans were created for the purpose of revealing or relieving the lesser gods. The higher gods from their work. Humans were created for the purpose of relieving the lesser gods of their burden, so they too could enjoy their leisure and their rest. And this was something that we found, and I've talked about this many times. Talked about it for my own books, talked about it for different discussions that we've had in this radio show, but you find this in the opening lines of the tale of Atrahasis. Now, Atrahasis was the human king in the city of Eridu, which was in the backwaters off the Euphrates River. And it was the city of Eridu that was surrounded by the swampy marshes in the backwaters of the Euphrates. And it was from these swampy marshes, which is what they called Ea's den, Ea being the same personage as Enki Ea. And Ea's den was where he would ride, the god would ride in his boat with his boatsmen, in what was known as the Serpent's Marsh, or Ea's den. And Ea's den, as we know, with the moving of religion from the Euphrates River Valley culture into the Canaanite culture, Ea's den became Ea den, or Eden. And so here you have the human king calling upon his god in the tale of Atrahasis. The opening lines attest to the situation before humans were created by saying, when the gods, like men, bore the labor, suffered the toil of the gods was immense. The work was heavy, the distress severe. The 7 great Anunnaki were making the Igigi suffer the labor. The Igigi were the lesser gods. So the higher gods had imposed this virtual slavery upon the lesser gods. And so the lesser gods bore the whole burden of producing food for all the gods. They would till the ground. They would mine the natural resources. They would dig the canals. And while the higher gods lounged in comfort, oh boy, bring me another julep. So the lesser gods were thus unable to participate in the divine prerogative of rest. And eventually the lesser gods revolted against Enlil, the chief god. Enlil being the name that down into the Canaanite culture became El. The El for Elohim, El Shaddai, El Elyon. Enki, Ea, becoming Yahweh, Jehovah. And so the lesser gods were unable to participate, and so they rebelled against the chief god Enlil, their godly king. So Enlil hastily summoned a divine council to deal with the crisis. And it was decided that the rebels' ringleader would be killed, and humankind would be fashioned from his blood mixed with clay. Henceforth humans would bear the burden of providing food for the gods. Thus all the gods could enjoy rest, like Enlil and the other high gods. And so this conception of divine status is encountered again in the epic of the Enuma Elish. The young Marduk volunteers to kill Tiamat, the monster of chaos, the ultimate threat to existence and order. And Marduk defeats Tiamat and splits her lifeless body in two to form the heavens and the earth. And when Marduk slays Tiamat's king, and as in the Atrahasis epic, fashions this humankind out of his body and blood, humans are created explicitly to bear the toil of the lesser gods, and the greater gods to allow them to rest, so that the gods may rest. And the proper posture for a deity is to be at ease, according to all this. And this is in the Enuma Elish. You can find this in the tale. And so the motif of divine rest or leisure was closely connected with the second motif of the sleeping deity. And these two motifs overlap because rest was divine prerogative. It was attributed to the head of the pantheon in the preeminent manner. The ability to sleep undisturbed was a symbol of his unchallenged authority as the supreme deity. He didn't have to get up and go to work. So the motif of divine rest or leisure as a godly prerogative was thus conjoined to creation in two different ways. One, already discussed, suggests that the Creator himself enjoyed rest after completing his work. Work, you could say, quote unquote. And the other suggests that the purpose of creation was to afford the gods their rightful rest. So this rest, and specifically sleep, was in turn coupled with the deity's function as this supreme ruler of heaven and earth. And the ability to sleep undisturbed was the symbol of a deity's absolute dominion over the heavens and the earth and the underworld and everything else. And so the most vivid image of this dominion was that of the Creator King subduing the chaos monster and then retiring to his chamber to sleep peacefully without fear of interruption. And all this lies in the background of the cry of the exiles in Deutero-Isaiah, asking their God to awake. And the act of God sleeping is in itself a reflection of his omnipotence. A number of psalms speak of God sleeping or arising from the sleep. Psalm 7, Psalm 44, Psalm 49, and 74. Psalm 44 must have been composed under circumstances nearly identical to those related to Deutero-Isaiah, when Isaiah was scattered among the nations. Israel was scattered among the nations. The world seems to be collapsing and reverting to chaos, and the psalmist calls on God to awake. Wake up! Why do you sleep, O Lord? Awake! Don't cast us off forever. Why do you hide your face? Why do you forget our affliction and our oppression? Get up! You must come to our rescue and deliver us for the sake of your steadfast love. That's Psalm 44. The motif of the sleeping deity is used to express Israel's belief in Yahweh's absolute kingship. Yahweh's reign is supreme. He can be counted on to awaken, just as he can be counted on to maintain that right order he decrees as creator and sovereign of all. And I got so much more material, but we're really drawing to the end of our time here. So I'm going to read a couple of more of these psalms, just so you get the idea. I already quoted from Psalm 74 in connection with God's contest with the sea monsters in the act of creation. But here, too, the psalmist is recalling this act of creation in the context of the Babylonian exile. We should not be surprised, therefore, that he then calls upon God to arise, to get out of bed, and to do something about the enemy who scoffs at him. Psalms 7, 35, and 59 are all laments of the individual, and it's difficult to date or place them in a historical context, though in dire straits the psalmist in each case has confidence that God will vindicate him. Typically, he calls on God to arise and to wake up. It says in Psalm 35, "You have seen, O Yahweh, do not remain silent. My Lord, be not far from me. Arise, wake up, for the sake of my justice. My God and my Lord, for the sake of my cause." And so behind psalms like this is that vestige of the ancient Near Eastern motif of the sleeping deity. So, portraying Yahweh as a sleeping God at times can be culturally conditioned theological statement to the effect that Yahweh is the creator and the absolute king of heaven and earth. And you know what? We'll come back and finish this up tomorrow because there's more to this. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you. We'll see you after this 23-hour break right back here. Good night.